Have you ever heard of a war where a modern, professional army was defeated by birds? It sounds like a joke, but I promise you, it's a real and absolutely bizarre chapter in history. Welcome to the story of the Great Emu War. Our tale begins way back in 1932, in the Campion district of Western Australia. The world was in the grip of the Great Depression, and Australian farmers, many of them World War I veterans who had been given land to cultivate, were already struggling to make ends meet. As if things weren't tough enough, they were about to face an invasion, not from a foreign army, but from an army of about 20,000 emus. Now, emus are not your average garden bird. They're huge, standing up to 6 feet tall, and they can run at speeds of up to 30 miles per hour. After their breeding season, these massive birds migrated from the inland regions towards the coast, and on their way, they discovered a paradise: the vast, freshly planted wheat fields of Western Australia. For the emus, it was an alukanit buffet. For the farmers, it was a catastrophe. The emus weren't just eating the crops. They were trampling everything in their path and knocking down fences, which then allowed other pests like rabbits to get in and cause even more damage. The farmers were desperate. They had tried everything, but the sheer number of emus was overwhelming. So, they did what anyone in a desperate situation would do. They called the government for help. The delegation of ex-soldiers turned farmers went to the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce. They made a peculiar request. They wanted the military to deploy machine guns to deal with the emu plague. It sounds extreme, but remember, these were veterans, familiar with the power of such weapons. Surprisingly, Sir George Pearce agreed. He saw a few potential benefits. Firstly, it would be great public relations to be seen helping the struggling veterans. Secondly, it could serve as a live-fire training exercise for the soldiers. And thirdly, the emu feathers could be used to make hats for the Australian light horsemen. So, the decision was made. The Royal Australian Artillery would officially go to war with the emus. In late October 1932, the military operation began. The force consisted of a grand total of 3 men. Major G.P.W. Meredith, of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery, who was in command, accompanied by Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran. Their arsenal: 2 Lewis automatic machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Their enemy? 20,000 large, fast, and surprisingly clever flightless birds. On paper, this looked like it would be over in a day. A modern army with machine guns against a flock of birds. It was no contest. Or so they thought. The first attempt was a washout. Heavy rains made the emus scatter over such a wide area that it was impossible to find a large group to target. The soldiers waited, and on November 2nd, their first real engagement took place. They spotted a flock of about 50 emus. The local farmers tried to herd the birds into an ambush, but emus are not sheep. They are wild, unpredictable, and incredibly wary. They stayed just out of range of the machine guns. The soldiers, getting impatient, opened fire anyway. The result: a few birds were killed, but the loud chatter of the machine guns sent the rest scattering in every direction, making them impossible targets. Major Meredith noted that the emus seemed to have an uncanny ability to organize. Each small group appeared to have a leader, a big black-plumed bird that would keep watch and give a warning call, at which point the rest of the flock would scatter. The soldiers tried a new tactic. 2 days later, on November 4th, they set up an ambush near a local dam where over 1,000 emus were known to gather. This was their chance for a decisive victory. They waited patiently for the birds to get close. When the emus were right in range, the gunners opened fire. The initial burst of fire was effective, and about a dozen birds fell. But then, disaster struck. One of the Lewis guns jammed. By the time they got it working again, the remaining 990 emus had vanished, melting into the bush like feathered ghosts. The element of surprise was gone. Major Meredith was starting to realize this was not the easy target practice he had anticipated. He wrote in his report that the emus seemed to have the invulnerability of tanks. He said, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. This was a professional soldier, admitting that these birds were tougher than he could have ever imagined. The next few days were a series of frustrating and largely fruitless encounters. The soldiers tried mounting one of the machine guns on a truck to chase the emus down. This seemed like a good idea, a mobile firing platform to match the emu's speed. But the reality was comical. The ride was so bumpy over the rough farmland that the gunner couldn't get a clear shot. At one point, the truck was going full speed, trying to keep up with a flock bouncing wildly when an emu ran in front of it and got tangled in the steering gear, causing the driver to swerve and crash through a farmer's fence. No emus were killed in this particular chase. The birds were simply too fast and too agile. They would split into small, unpredictable groups, zigzagging across the landscape, making them incredibly difficult targets for a machine gun designed to fire on large, concentrated groups of enemies. After nearly a week of this war, the results were embarrassing. The military had used over 2,500 rounds of ammunition, and the official body count, the estimates vary wildly, from as low as 50 to perhaps a few hundred emus, out of a population of 20,000. The press, back in the cities, got wind of the operation, and it quickly became a source of national ridicule. Headlines mocked the military's futile efforts. One conservationist in the Australian Parliament wryly asked if a medal was going to be awarded to the machine gunners for their valiant fight. The public perception was turning against the operation. It seemed cruel, inefficient, and frankly, a bit silly. By November 8th, just 6 days after the first engagement, the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce, facing mounting pressure and public mockery, decided to pull the plug. Major Meredith and his men were recalled, and the First Emu War came to an ignominious end. The emus had won. They continued to feast on the wheat fields, and the farmers were right back where they started. In fact, the problem got worse. The farmers again pleaded for military assistance, and believe it or not, a second war was approved later that same month. Major Meredith was sent back into the field, this time with a slightly different strategy. They were more aggressive and had learned from their previous failures. This second campaign was statistically more successful. In about a month, they managed to kill nearly 1,000 emus using almost 10,000 rounds of ammunition. However, the emu population was still thriving, and the damage to crops continued. Major Meredith himself ultimately concluded that large-scale extermination was not a practical solution. The military officially withdrew for good in December 1932. So, what happened in the end? The government didn't send the army back. Instead, they adopted a more sustainable and ultimately more effective solution: a bounty system. The government offered a reward for every emu killed by the farmers themselves. This decentralized approach proved far more successful than the military campaign. Over a 6-month period in 1934, over 57,000 bounties were claimed. The government also invested in better, more robust fencing to protect the farmlands. This combination of incentives and infrastructure finally brought the emu problem under control. The Great Emu War has gone down in history as one of the most absurd and comical conflicts ever recorded. It's a classic underdog story, where nature outsmarted military might. But there's a serious lesson here too. It's a powerful reminder that technology and overwhelming force are not always the answer. The emus didn't have weapons or a battle plan, but they had survival instincts, speed, and an unpredictable nature that made them an impossible enemy for a conventional military force. The Australian Army learned a humbling lesson. You won't always solve a problem by simply shooting at it. Sometimes, the most effective solutions are the ones that work with nature, not against it. The emus of Western Australia, with their surprising tactical genius, proved that point in the most unforgettable way possible. So next time you see an emu, maybe give it a little nod of respect. You're looking at the undefeated champion of one of history's strangest wars. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this weird piece of history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you next time.